Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Jessica Corvo, and I am super duper excited. Oh, labels for today. I think decent human being and warrior. Those are the ones we're going to stick with today. And I am here. It brings me great, great, great pleasure to be here with an open jam session with one of my friends. His name is Paul, and we connected on LinkedIn through all of my posts. I was on a binge at the moment talking. I think it was about violence in the workplace because I had already done domestic violence, and then I was drawing a connection into violence in the workplace. And we just connected and we hopped on a phone call. You were in a coffee shop, and it was just beautiful, beautiful spirit, back and forth. And then very loose, like on LinkedIn. And the magical thing about good connections is that time can pass, but you pick straight up. And I keep an eye on what you're doing, and I'm super proud of you. And that's why I was so honored when I started putting together the ideas for all of the mental health awareness extravaganza. And I just wanted to highlight anything from personal stories, coaches, therapists, survivors, warriors, and just have them share their story, kind of what they're doing, help raise awareness, and keep it, as simple or as complex, all in the name of stronger together. So with that said, Paul, thank you so much for allowing me to record our jam session for the public.
To be honest, we had to actually struggle to get it done actually because we were just talking and we were flowing. So this is, if anything, this is kind of mid-flow. So whoever's going to be watching and listening to this, they're going to have right from minute one. They're going to have good because we've got all the bit out of the way.
Absolutely, it was like, wait, time out. We got to hit record. Absolutely. Absolutely. And what we were just talking about that I do want to honor is the fact that when you go through any kind of like warrior journey, and warrior journey can be anything. It could be an actual clinical diagnosis for mental health. It could be, any kind of life accidents that might not result in a mental diagnosis, but it could be a physical diagnosis. It could be an emotional diagnosis. It could be anything that you've had to bounce back from. Resilience expert. And I think, shameless plug. And I think, honoring the space that you hold for yourself after some kind of event is super important. And so we were just talking about how TBI month is in March, and you are one of the top voices and the top anchors and cornerstones for the entire population. I was looking up some statistics, so correct me if I'm wrong, but for TBI, it affects roughly 2.5 million people a year. And it estimates about 50,000 deaths. So those aren't small numbers. And so the fact that you were consistent throughout the entire month to raising awareness and helping people understand what exactly is TBI, what are the different classifications for it, and how, most importantly, in my opinion, for recovery is how to be an advocate and also an ally for it. So we were just talking about how that's actually pretty draining. So you're on your recovery, rest and relaxation part of it, and allowed me into that space so that we could hit the ground running again for another month of mental health.
See that I think everything you said there is just so right. And I set myself a personal goal throughout March because it's only 1 month, and it always seems weird when you say, oh, it's XYZ month. I get it. I love that there's awareness. But when the month ends, it doesn't end. It just carries on for the rest of those days. So I set myself the task in March to post something every single day, and I'm regularly post anyway, about traumatic brain injury and brain injury awareness. And I was sort of coordinating with the American Brain Injury Awareness because in Canada, it's actually in June. So, hey, we like to be different.
And usually that's our role in the US. Take something that works and have our own spin to it.
It just means I get 2 bites of the cherry, so I'm not really complaining. But the thing is, and you mentioned warrior, you don't get to be a warrior if you don't come out with battle scars. You have to earn that title. And I don't like titles, but that journey does not come easily, and therefore in order, I didn't want it to be all sweet, all, you know, sunshine and rainbows. I wanted to show the true face of it. I wanted to get really into it and explain why and the statistics and how that happens. And I looked at different things. So there was obviously the military, everyone associates that. Then there was accidents, domestic violence, addiction, suicide. It's almost like a complete circle, but people only see a very small part. And for me, awareness is the biggest gift you can give anyone, is awareness, because when you give awareness, it chases away the fear and doubts.
Absolutely. Awareness before change. I mean, that's a fundamental principle for any kind of warrior journey. And it's interesting though, because when you were talking about TBI and all the different communities, right? Whether it's like the military, that's pretty obvious. Domestic violence, definitely obvious. I'm surprised that you didn't mention athletes, because my knowledge is that football players, there's actually quite a lot of football players that end up with concussions, but maybe
I,
like undiagnosed concussions, because it's very physical. And then they end up with TBI, a little too
yeah,
much
no,
contact.
I must, I did. It's kind of difficult to remember all, but the
Yeah.
absolutely, when people say, "Oh, it's just there is nothing mild about anything."
Yeah.
It's a brain injury, and I in before COVID, I coached a local high school team at rugby, and
Mhm.
of course, you know, like football, I mean, there are potentially more injuries at football because you've
Mhm.
got the padding on, so you think you can run
People hit
harder.
harder. Yeah, people hit harder because of
Exactly.
the padding. I'm like, you guys are
So, you know,
goofy.
you rattle your brain around inside the helmet, but that has a big effect. And
Yeah.
one of the big things as a coach is the concussion protocols to play again.
Mhm.
And I am really pleased that sport is taking it seriously. I also see there's a lot of sport veterans now coming forward and saying, look, this is a problem. Even soccer, heading the ball. I
Mhm.
mean, you know, that
Yeah.
comes at a fair pay. But you see, awareness, I think
Yeah.
people being brave, people stepping forward to
Mhm.
share their experiences, heroes, you know, heroes
Absolutely.
of who we and actually learning about what their journey is, because it's all hush unless they actually
Mhm.
are prepared to take that stand.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with you 150%. I think a lot of times people get really nervous about breaking their silence and talking about things for whatever reason. I mean, there's plenty of reasons that you stand to lose a lot. You stand to have your mental stability challenged, depending on what it is. And for me, when I broke my silence about domestic violence, there was a lot of people that called me crazy, a lot of people. And at the end of the day, it was like, I'm the same person. I still climb corporate ladders. I still cross Ironman finish lines. I still, if that's crazy, then all right, that's a label I'm going to accept for right now. And so be it. All I know is that domestic violence escalates. And if I don't take it serious, my friends and family are going to have to bury me. And I broke my silence because I was like, I didn't have anyone in my community that was open about it. So I didn't know what to do. But I just had that life or death in my mind. You talk about it or that's it. And you find a way. And in hindsight, I'm glad I did it, because now there's so many people, even today, that come back and they're like, I can't even imagine, but thank you. And it kind of paved a little bit of a way for them to empower themselves. And so I think, with the TBI, it's very interesting because I know there's a lot of I don't know, athletes are idolized. And so when you talk about mental health or invisible wounds, and that's exactly what it is, the TBI is an invisible wound. There's not always a connection with any kind of physical type things, and or like visual type things. And if they come back, and how do you go from professional top of the game, and then you're like, this is what I'm struggling with, it's humbling. A lot of people, they might not want to talk about it specifically because of that image.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, taking a risk and being vulnerable yourself, and you know, people talk a lot about being authentic, and I
Mhm.
do believe that. Being, I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking, of course, because of COVID, the domestic violence is spiking because people,
400% in the
yeah,
first 9 weeks. We look at 10 to 12 million new cases every year. In the first 9 weeks, 400%. You're not alone.
no.
It's
But
like,
you see, the problem thing, the what I have found is that mental health, when you're in it, it is, it's almost like it tries to make you feel alone, disempowered, and helpless. And as soon as you start turning that light of awareness on it, then you, in my view, you start getting that power back, because you start realizing that you are not the only one. And
yeah.
as soon as you start shining the light around, you start seeing all these other people. And it's not because you want to have a pity party, it's actually
Mhm.
because you do realize that there are far more people who are on their, nobody knows the battles people fight in private. And
Yeah.
so I think it's, and that's why I like awareness
Mhm.
things, because actually that could save and change somebody's life right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, I mean, there's a couple different things that were cropping up as you're talking that are so important. I think on one side, the sense of community. I mean, for my personal branding, it was be your own hero, because that was the isolating part of any kind of journey, right? And now it's stronger together, because to get to that next level, I had to validate myself. And now to find that continued healing, you find your support groups, you find your different communities, you find the people to offer the workshops to shed light for everyone else. And, in context of that, in a more general perspective, when you're little and you're scared of the dark, and your mind can be so incredibly creative, and you're sitting there and you're just like, oh my goodness, there's monsters, oh my goodness, there's, like, the boogeyman's underneath my bed. And if you take a light and you literally just look, you're just like, oh, it's just a teddy bear. Or, oh, it's my stinky sneakers, or something like this.
It's the shadow. Everyone knows what the shadow on the wall looks like 10 times the size. And it's like,
Absolutely. But you shed light or you give it a name, and then it's always less scary, because I've found that reality is actually a lot better than what we think it can be. So
and
always talk about it.
no, I agree. And, this is not your first rodeo, I'd like to say to people. You've had
Yeah.
setbacks your entire life. That's how it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, they don't realize that actually they have that inside them. And if awareness can bring that to the surface in the individual, and I always think that the power of story is a very, very wonderful thing. So for me, I have a constant desire to learn other people's stories, other people's journeys. Not because I'm nosy, but no, it's not because it's actually because the power of a story. And then you are not your story. And this, I teach this on a public speaking course I run. Is that you are not your story. You are the lessons that you've learned from that story. And
Absolutely.
that's why warriors, they're there because they want to pass on how they became the
Absolutely.
warrior. And
Absolutely.
that's the awareness
You become,
element.
by sharing your story, you become a page in somebody else's survival guide. I mean, that is your purpose. The most important days of your life are the day that you're born and the day that you figure out why. So any kind of adversity that you go through, it's your responsibility to make it through. That way you can take your best of and help others. I mean,
And
if you oversimplify the process of life.
I mean, you can't,
And have some fun along the way.
yeah, boil it down to take one of these, that's life. Well, that tasted nice. Um, but the whole idea, and this is what concerns me, and this is why I think the awareness is important, is that for the mental health, there's a lot of physical symptoms which actually come from mental health.
Mm.
But mental health is only diagnosed when that symptom becomes so bad that you have to actually go and see somebody because something is physically wrong.
Mhm.
And by that time, it's kind of like the iceberg is just pushing up over the surface. But to get
So
there,
much stuff underneath.
exactly. And
Yeah.
th- that's when potential diagnoses are made. But that's because it's got so far down the line that actually it's
Yeah.
turned into something physical.
Mhm.
And that that is one of the reasons I suspect we do it. It's not everyone has mental health. There's not one single person who does not have mental health, whether it's
Right.
good, whether it's fit, it's not, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's realizing where you are. And this is where listening to other people and you think, oh, and then you then take action. It's not a passive thing. You must take the action.
Absolutely. I think so. A couple of things to kind of complement what you're saying. For me, I think my background and my conditioning is within the domestic violence space. So there's a couple different layers from physical, emotional, and mental capacity for that, right? And my internal strength is because I learned early on, don't let a criticism go to your heart and don't let a compliment go to your head. Always question everything. And so for me, since I grew up with that, I know that it's okay to build that community. I know that it's okay to ask for help. I know that it's okay to do everything else. Number one, ask. Number two, evaluate if it's good, if it's relevant, right? And then be on my way. And I think for a lot of other people, number one, they don't know how to ask for help because the hardest things in the world are to say, I'm sorry, I love you, and please help me. And so a lot of people don't have those tools. And then also a lot of people, you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't know what questions to ask, or if you don't have a strong sense of self, you might have a good mental health day if you're surrounded by a whole bunch of motivational people, or you could have a bad mental health day if you are surrounded by a bunch of people that are just belly aching and moaning and groaning about a bunch of different things. But that's more about your surroundings and is about you. And so I think there's so many different layers. For me, I always look to check, how do you process things, because I'm evaluating everybody, right? And so it's just like, I don't know if I trust your viewpoint, especially if I'm trying to work something out.
Mm.
And it's not trying to be rude, it's just, I'm not. You got to protect yourself. You got to always protect your sphere and your core, because if you let the wrong people in from a domestic violence space, that could destroy you, because you're consciously working through all of that. So if I'm getting really spicy, like my nickname in Singapore is a chili patty, if I'm getting really spicy, that's when I need to step back. And they're just like, oh, you're a little short today. I'm like, well, thank you. And then I reflect, I'm like, all right, well, who am I around? What am I doing? What am I doing here? And so that's one of my manifestations and one of my actualizations of realizing when I become a little bit less generous of spirit, it's because I need to reevaluate. It's time to audit my surroundings. In context of the TBI, um, just to make it simple for the benefit of all of our listeners and everything, TBI is trauma brain injury. So that can happen from somebody hitting you or you hitting something. It's just having like a movement and kind of like rattling it around that can cause damage, because in our head we have a whole bunch of water, like not water, but like liquid around like our brain. And if we move too quickly, our brain is not attached to anything, it's kind of floating around. And so when it hits something, it creates like a bruise. And so we can bruise our arms, or if we bump something. But this is basically oversimplified, please correct me, but my understanding is it's kind of like a bruise on the brain. And so when we do that, and we have to give it time to heal, we have to give it time to kind of you know get back to what it was. And so sometimes when you get a TBI, depending on the severity of it, it doesn't heal, and so people end up with that injury for the rest of their life. Is that more or less kind of?
It's so well put. It really is.
Thanks. We
And
do get a lot of that in the DV
yeah,
space, so that's the only reason why I know this.
but you see, it doesn't. And people like, oh, if did you have a hit to the head? Well, it's a whiplash. It's lots of other things. And you're right. It's anything which actually. And one thing I didn't appreciate, it's not just the bang; it's also the counter as well. So,
Yeah,
um,
it's a front and then the back, so you can get it on
yeah.
a roller coaster.
Exactly, because it doesn't just hit one and then go, oh, I'm back.
Right.
It's as you said, it's floating. If you had something in water and you tipped it hard, it's going to go to both edges. And what you said earlier, which I thought was a very interesting point, is that especially for TBIs, it's an injury, and the physical injury came first. The mental injury didn't materialize until things started to settle down. And at that point, and then the doctor said, "Oh, it's going to be, you're going to have a long recovery." I mean, they said 2 years, and I was like, two what? I've got things I want to do, but the mental injury, which actually came not at the beginning, And that is where it's left me with chronic PTSD. That I didn't have PTSD the minute I woke up. And largely, this is the thing, the physical injuries have largely healed,
Mhm.
not the mental injury. That's now going
Mhm.
past, and it's something which I live with every day.
So
Um,
let's take a little bit of a sidestep just to kind of help everyone connect the
mm,
dots. This is stuff that we're very familiar with. So let's simplify for everyone else. So when you have the physical injury or the accident or the movement, and then you have like the bounce, and then that's kind of like if you're comparing it to the body, if you hit something and then you can see the bruise. So in a physical world, if you can see the bruise, you can watch the colors change or it heal, and then you can be on your way. When you're dealing with, and of course correct me if I'm wrong, this is my way of simplifying. When you're dealing with the mind, it's an invisible wound, so you don't know. Sometimes even if you get brain scans, you don't know how it's not, oh, this part needs a band-aid, or oh, this part is swelling, or you can't always tell. We don't have the technology yet to be able to see like all those different nuances.
and, and
um
and also, you're talking about an injury in a box. It's like, so an injury, if you hurt yourself, it has the
yeah,
outside swelling. It has the space in which
yeah.
it can, everyone's had a bruise when it just spreads, oh my goodness.
Mhm.
One, you can't see it, which is which is one of the huge difficulties about the injury and talking about the injury. And it's in a closed box, so there's only so much it can go into.
And
You,
then your PTSD came out because when you're in the physical body and you can see and you can adjust because you have that physical reminder, that visual reminder of something that's happening, then it's different. Because when you don't, it's such a difficult thing to rationalize, saying, oh, wait, this is what's happening. Oh, wait, this is, and people, they're not treating you any different. They're not, if you break your leg, for an example, people will open doors for you.
I
But if you have a TBI, they're looking at you and they're like, why can't you do this? You were doing this a couple of years ago. Why is it so difficult? And then you end up building up that resentment, anger, and all these different whatever emotions are coming up, and frustration, probably top of everything, because you're just like, how do you not understand? Because this is something you're living with, but they don't understand it because they can't see it. And so that, I think, I mean, I don't want to make an assumption, but in my mind, this is where a lot of like the PTSD or the CPTSD would originate from, is that frustration of, number one, maybe not being able to explain it, but number two, it's also, once you do explain it, there's that level of people just not wanting to believe it. It's not that they don't want to, but they just don't know how.
I think you've hit on so many good points there, and I do this a lot. This one, um, this is the face of mental health. This is what it looks like. It doesn't look
Me
anything.
too, me
Yeah,
too. I love when people call me crazy. I'm like, I'll take it, let's
that,
do it.
but you see, that's the big thing. There's so many people who you see, and thinking that somebody looks different because they have that. They don't. They look like, and you would never know. And I am a high functioning person, which also makes it doubly difficult, because people say, and oh, you look fine. Or like, yeah, it means I'm really trying hard to look fine. Because people haven't, if they say, well, how are you? They don't want to hear they just want to hear fine. And that's good. That's what
They
it's
want
a
to feel good
sound.
about it. They want to
Yeah.
feel good about themselves. They don't want you calling them out.
But you see, they that's a platitude, and they don't want you to stop. And so you're right about um, the fact, one, it's invisible, big problem. Secondly, if you're high functioning, even more of a problem. Thirdly, you're right, trying to explain something which you can't even explain to yourself.
Because you're still trying to come to terms with it. You're just
Yeah, you're
like,
like,
I'm doing
well,
the best that I can. I don't know.
they say, what's it like? And I'm like, oh, that's kind of a big question, and I need to
How
actually,
much time do you have?
but
Let's
I
boil
need
a
to
pot
put
of
it,
water.
but you see, you need to put it into language of which
Yeah.
they were capable of
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah.
And you have to work on what they may have experienced in the past, because that's the lens they see things through.
Put it in
It's
context for them as well. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and not frightening, because it's not about frightening people. It's actually about, and it's not about trying to, it is a kind of protect people, because it's important they know, because again, and the whole thing of, I personally, for me, my biggest word is awareness.
Mhm.
Because when you're aware,
Yeah.
well, how do you get the awareness? Well, you're aware. So it's an ever increasing
Yeah.
cycle, and you know, there's certain things you just really, and I've heard them all,
Yeah.
you shouldn't say to people, oh, don't
Yeah.
worry, there's plenty more fish in the sea. I don't want any fish. And
Mhm.
and
Absolutely.
you'll get over it, suck it up, almost silly. So, and I get it.
That's a toxic positivity. I mean, I was guilty of toxic positivity for a very long time. And I think that it's an important nuance to very much understand because, again, in the domestic violence context, you need toxic positivity in the very beginning. If you don't, you will not survive, full stop, because that's survival, straight up survival. It's necessary. Once you're out of that survival, that actual life or death situation, then you can let go of the toxic positivity. But you need it. Everything is there's a time and a place for everything. And so I go back and forth because you see all these people talking about like, oh, toxic positivity. And I'm like, wait, Jess, are we in our trauma mind? Are we in our Iron Man, everything is good mind? Because I can see it simultaneously from multiple different perspectives. And it's very difficult because I think, stepping back, when you're talking about high functioning people, anytime that you have trauma, whether it's violence, accident, work, family, friends, any trauma whatsoever, the way that you handle it, it's not just what happens to you, but it's how you handle it. So when you handle it in a way that becomes a habit and becomes your character and becomes your person, people have that expectation that you're going to handle it. So when you're high functioning, it creates this dynamic where, for whatever reason, you're just like, you know what, I'm not going to count on anybody else. I got me, so it's fine. And you carry on with your business. It creates an unhealthy environment for whatever reason. It doesn't matter why. It's a fact. This is what happens for high functioning people. And then once you get to that point where you're just like, well, I actually need some help. Number one, you don't know how to ask for help because these people have been watching you the entire time. They're just like, well, they always bounce, like they got them. And then it becomes like this tug of war where it's just like you feel ashamed because you don't want to be asking for help, but you've reached that limit where you just can't manage it on your own anymore. And then people don't know how to help you because they're just like, that's not the role you play. We
Yeah,
don't know
I
what to
mean,
do.
I think people are shocked when you actually suddenly turn around and you don't meet their expectations, not yours. You don't meet their expectations. Like, oh,
Yeah.
and I think that is a problem. And there's a great saying which came into mind: if you want something done, give it to the busiest person in the room. And
High achiever, the high achiever, it's
because
done.
they'll just pull it in and they'll just do it, and then and you know it's very difficult. And you're right, you cannot split yourself in two. You are, you aren't. You either deal with things in a certain way because that's how you've always dealt with it. And
Yeah.
one of the big things is in the early days, I still see him now. I have a psychologist, and he said, "Stop you there." And I said, "Okay." And he says, "In the best will in the world, you don't believe a word you're saying. You're telling me things I need to hear."
The lies
And
we tell ourselves, ask yourself every day. What are the
yeah,
lies I'm telling myself today?
well,
I love it.
number one takeaway from that: do not pick an argument with a psychologist. You will lose. Okay, you just do not even waste your time on that. Um, and but he said you have got so many good learned behavior coping mechanisms,
Yeah,
but none of them are going to help you with what you're facing. He said, so we're going to have to take that armor down. We're going to build you a brand new set, and the only way you can do that is you're going to have to press the pressure point. You're going to have to press where it hurts. You don't
you
want
got to
to
go through
press.
it. You got
Yeah,
to go through it.
yeah. I
Rip
mean,
off that band-aid and just go through it.
yeah, if there's a bruise there, you don't press up here and go, you're fine. You press it at the point, you go, okay, that hurts. All right, tell
Yeah.
me, what does that actually mean? And it's not this mental health, full stop. And I really am against labels, is difficult.
Yeah.
And I think labels are potential. I get it. We have to understand what it is, but it's
Mhm.
trying to put an objective standard on a subjective problem,
Mhm.
because what one thing is trauma for one is not for another. And
Absolutely.
just think the fear of the dark. Some people are,
Yeah.
some people aren't. That's not
Yeah.
because they're defective. It's just how
Yeah.
they have a different view. And
Yeah.
I think that potentially, I mean, there's so many people with initials after the name. When I was a kid, it was, okay, there may have been initials. That's a part of being a kid. But there wasn't seen to be, well, he's that, she's this, that. And I think
Yeah.
society has become slightly obsessed, well, more than slightly, obsessed with actually trying to label everything.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that because actually earlier today I put up a video. People that I respect, they were talking about labeling your emotions. I'm like, no, I don't agree with that. Why do you label your emotions? If I'm feeling a certain way and if I say that I'm anxious, I'm going to become anxious because now my perception is going to make me play that role or make me experience what I think I'm experiencing rather than observing and listening to whatever my body is trying to tell me. And that is my inner turmoil. I'm at war with myself when I put labels on things because and I get very upset when people are just like, why are you so angry? I'm triggered because that's a conditioning for me. That's a way to oppress me. That's a way to control me. And then I get angry because my inner turmoil is trying not to label. And my default is actually just using everything. If I'm in a real bad place, I convert to anger because anger is my easiest fuel to go through. Not externally, but internally. That's the one that will get me in that manic state or whatever if I need to
Well, it's the
finish.
fight and flight, isn't it? It's the,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's the
Yeah.
injection of adrenaline, and
100%.
it's
But
biological.
it's normal. It's normal. I'm not saying it's healthy, but it's normal. But then now we have this interesting dynamic where people don't want to have that critical thought anymore. It's easier to judge than it is to think. And so when we're having these conversations, it's they're judging themselves, they're judging other people and saying, okay, I am a Chinese Italian American, I am a female business owner, I am a global world traveler, I am an Ironman, I am. And then somebody comes through and they're just like, well, what races have you done? What finish lines have you crossed? Well, why do I have to prove something to you? Well, if that was important to you, then I'm just trying to have a conversation. And then all
Well,
of a
you see,
sudden you
I
get
think
like
I
a
think it.
relationship that just breaks down. And it's like,
I think it's because again we're obsessed with measuring things, and it's like what gets measured gets managed. It's a corporate phrase. Leave it in corporate, and that's fine. I mean,
yeah,
when I was early in my days of my recovery from my accident, I think post-traumatic growth is a real important thing, because you may start somewhere, but that is actually not where you're going to finish. Every day there's some
yeah.
sort of recovery, and it's not a straight line. I have to be told that a lot, because
I feel the same way with the word healing. No,
yeah,
it's growth.
well, you see, that's the
You're not
thing.
broken. There's nothing that you got to heal from.
Yeah,
You're growing from
I
it.
mean, when anyone says that, the thing that comes to mind is I think it's Japanese, or the Japanese, when they drop a vase and they repair it with,
Kintsugi, the
yeah, they
kintsugi,
repair it with gold.
gold. Yeah,
And I just think that's such a, for somebody who's feeling like that, and actually, and that goes to self-worth, it goes, and then that bleeds into everything else. But if you actually start thinking that vase is infinitely more pretty and
mhm,
interesting because it's got that, and we, to a certain extent, we all got that. I have never met and I'm not a person who isn't broken, never.
yeah,
um and it doesn't matter. I mean, it's not a competition who's the broken the most.
yeah,
But I think, the recognizing that there is levels,
yeah.
and we go back to, the definition of trauma is ridiculously low. It's something that overwhelms the brain. Well, that's a
Or the
very,
system. It's just
yeah,
something that overwhelms the system,
it's a
like
very, very low
complete.
threshold. I mean, you have to,
Yeah.
and so, and
Well, now that they're sanitizing everything, you can have a traumatic situation we're in a pandemic, just walking down the street is considered a traumatic situation for somebody, because I think that everything has to be in context, right? So if we're in a situation that has a lot of turbulence or a lot of, different situations versus something that has just been sanitized, people are going to be completely different, because they don't have that callus. They don't have that,
Scar tissue. Because what does the
yeah,
scar do? It
yeah,
covers the injury in a thick shell,
yeah,
and so that's one of the healing. It puts down
yeah,
additional fibers and stuff to around what the injury is.
absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
and one of my big worries, and this may not be particularly popular, but I've come up with I copy a lot of Ricky Gervais. I don't care. So,
I like him. He's funny.
um, and what my big concern is, and I've written an article recently, is about COVID.
Mhm.
Okay, we are in this COVID moment at the moment when effectively there's some sort of normality is returned. That's when the mental fallout from being
Mhm.
strong for so long. I mean, it's a frontline workers and just even the normal people trying to get by.
Yeah.
Then there's going to be a time when suddenly, boom, it hits,
Mhm.
and mental
They're going in
health.
survival mode, because they're just going in survival
Exactly.
mode, and these are the strong people, these are the high achievers. I mean, this is just what happens, because you can only be strong for so long. Everybody has a threshold, everybody.
Mm.
And it was like, I wrote this article a couple of years ago, called The Abused Dog. And I was trying my best to try to understand a way, like find a way to talk about domestic violence where people would get it. And it was like, okay, dogs are not born aggressive. Dogs become aggressive because it's learned behavior, right? So if you get a dog and you beat the crap out of the dog in the beginning is going to try to seek your approval. It's going to change the behavior and it's going to seek your approval. And then you continue to beat the crap out of that dog, and it's going to continue to try to, because it thinks it's doing something wrong. If you break the dog, then it's just going to disappear and go someplace else to avoid you, to avoid getting beat up. If the dog decides it's going to stand its ground, it's going to come back, it's going to bite you, or it's going to growl at you, or it's going to say enough is enough. Those are the two things, right? And when it comes to people, it's the same damn thing. And so people are just going to disappear. And we judge people for saying that, oh, you know what, you can't control their people, so just let them go. Well, for me, I'm gonna let you go, but if you come after me, I'm gonna stand my ground, and I'm gonna tell you what I'm gonna do if you don't turn around and leave me alone.
Hell have
And so
no
for
fury
me,
like
it's
a
like,
woman
I'm not
scorned.
encouraging it. I'm just telling you, I'm doing my own business. Leave me alone.
It's going to be hell have no fury like a woman scorned. Um,
But I think that's normal though, because we judge people for saying that. 'Cause it's like, just let it go.
mm,
It's not about letting it go, because if it's something that you're living with in the domestic violence space, if it's somebody that's coming after you, you are allowed to protect yourself. If it's in the TBI space, if it's something that you need or that you require for your wellness, this is something that you are allowed to confront. You are allowed to use that voice. And it drives me crazy when people are just like, oh, don't worry about it. Going back to like the toxic positivity, or going back to sometimes people, they just don't care. And it's like, not my problem.
and
And that's it. And that, to me, that apathy is like the saddest thing in the world.
well, it is. It is. I mean, I really relate to the about the dogs. I actually volunteer once a week to walk the dogs at the local refuge. Now
Mhm.
we get them in as mainly sort of strays or rescue or abusive dogs,
Mhm.
and there's certain things where are reactive and they're very much a sensing of energy, and I've become really good at energy, and they will read the energy before you do anything, and then their reaction takes place. It's that invisible thing which we all have as well. I mean,
We're
the
just too clouded by social media and everything else. We're just like, we need an app to translate that. No, you need to go sit by yourself for a minute.
the heart, the electromagnetic field from the heart extends 3 feet from the body. So you've got this invisible bubble, and everyone has picked up. Well, there's a negative vibe, or and you sense it. You don't. There's not a smart goal to
Yeah,
sense it. You don't go to
yeah,
sensory school. It's just
yeah.
actually what you feel, and that is something where. Um, when that energy comes into conflict with another energy and you get that interface,
Mhm.
that's where and that's so difficult to put into words. I mean,
Yeah.
if you said, hey, I think my energy's being bruised, they'd be like, say what?
But it's so true. I was watching this movie the other day and they were talking about magnets because they were talking about energy. And it's like, well, how do you talk about things that you can't see? I mean, for religion, you have, the higher
Faith.
power, yeah, you have faith. It's just faith. But then for the science people, you have magnets. So if you have a magnet, you can like literally see the magnets, they can come together or like they get pushed apart. So that's energy. That's not intangible, not, things that people just, yeah, but no, there's not, yeah, but it's just accept it and just observe.
Well, it's like
But
when, trust,
yeah,
that is an entirely on faith. And I'm not a particularly religious person, so I read faith as something
yeah,
different, without
yeah,
religious connotation.
yeah,
And for me, faith, my own personal faith, the definition of faith, it's gratitude in motion. And
yeah,
but I think it's very, that comes back to the culture of, we're one, with me, what's in it for me, so that's
mhm,
not my problem. And secondly, how do I measure it? How do I
yeah,
You can't measure, well, you can measure trust when it gets broken. Love,
yeah.
when somebody says I'm in love, all right, tell me what that means. They can't. They tell you all the physical things and how they feel and stuff, but
Exactly.
that is not where the nucleus is. And
But we justify so many things for whatever we need. So if we don't want something, if something doesn't fit our narrative, we can find a million things to dismiss it. And then if we want something, it could make zero sense whatsoever. We're not changing our mind because that's what we want.
no, I think you're right. And that
I
starts.
stopped arguing with people. I'm like, you already made
No,
up
no.
your mind. There's no point.
You see, that starts the whole debate of, is it a want or is it a need? And where, and if everything in life was clear cut, one, it would be really boring if everything was
Yeah.
completely clear cut. And
Yeah.
it's not. We're all shades of grey. I've written some books where I use the black and the white wolf.
Mhm.
And and it's after the old native Indian teaching.
Yeah.
And some days we're more black than we are white, and other days. And
Mhm.
so it's you
That's the
when
yin
you're,
and the yang. There's the light and
yeah,
the dark and the dark and the light. It's
exactly.
part of being whole.
And and people say, well, how are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 10? I'm like, well, at the moment a 4, but that could go to a 10, that can go to a 1. Oh, well, how come? I was like, because you don't live your life at a 4, you don't live your life at a 7 or an 8.
What are you talking about? We're high achievers. We're at nines and tens all day, every day. Just
But you
kidding.
see, that's when people are, and but it's like, but everyone, they
Yeah.
go from A to B, and again, that's kind of, that's the danger of, and we've kind of touched on it, putting in a manageable chunks.
Yeah.
And mental health is entirely invisible. It only manifests itself in different ways. It manifests
Yeah.
itself in our reaction to the environment or
Mhm.
physical, but it's not, that's a symptom rather than anything else.
Absolutely. I think that it's incredible to, reiterate to different people that number one, just as you say, mental health is something that everybody has and that everybody is responsible for, and that everyone has the right and they're entitled to protect it.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, it can be in regards to Jane Fonda, Ink Through Your Life. No is a complete sentence. Sometimes when you say no to other people, you say yes to self. You
Mm.
don't need to explain it, just no, and then you move forward. And then another thing would just be trying to set yourself up for success. So if you're struggling with emotional regulation, having all of my knowledge in nutrition and sports and everything, cut out the sugars. You cut out the processed sugars, it will do wonders for your emotional regulation, like wonders. Like that is like the simplest like hack out of everything, but it's the most complex because we are conditioned, our bodies are conditioned. It's almost like a drug addiction, right? So we go and we're feeling a certain way, we eat our feelings, and then we go and have something, and then we feel bad about it because we know that we shouldn't have had that, And then we just have another one because you're like, well, bird done it. Then
If the damage is
the
done, I ain't.
bag, the bag's already open.
But
and,
I
and it
think
ends
you're
up
right.
being a cycle that suppresses our entire system, and it prevents us from having that healthy regulation, because then things stop firing and connecting to each other, and then things just start breaking down, which puts us in a worse position. So I think in terms of actual physical things that people can do, it would be making sure that you're drinking your water, making sure that you're getting the sleep, making sure that you have movement. It doesn't have to be, big exercise or something. Just 5-minute walk down, outside or down the street, or if you have stairs in the house, a couple times up and down, just to get the blood flowing a little bit. I
Uh,
mean, simple. It costs you nothing to do any of those.
I think you're right, and another one which it's been something that's been thrown around. So when you say whatever you feel when I say this word, that will tell you how much has been thrown around. But self-compassion,
Mhm,
and people call it self-love, and I can tell you a lot of things it isn't, which is it's not taking a picture of yourself and everything. No, it's not selfish.
mhm,
It's actually your and you if you're a sports fan like I am,
mhm,
this view it as like Formula One. It's a pit stop. You pull into the pit, you have a team of 30 plus mechanics who put all the new things on your car and get you back out in the race. And
mhm.
that is an essential part of winning or losing the race. Timeouts called in sports. Let's have a
Yeah,
timeout, and that's when they huddle up and they actually say, right, okay, but
the
it's not the
community.
same game plan they went out with.
Yeah.
It's adapted, and that's what
Mhm,
that time is not meant to be. Oh, it's a week, I'm giving up. And I wrestle with this all the time. It's like, well, if I don't try today, have I actually just put my hand up and say I'm surrendering? No,
mhm,
it's
mhm,
actually your pit stop. And the
mhm.
car that starts the race is not the car that finishes it. It's full of different parts.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's how we are.
You don't stop when you're tired, you stop when you finish. And that nuance is beautifully, you just beautifully explained it, because it's the warrior mindset. It's just, all right, today I've had enough and tomorrow I'm going to start again. But right now, I mean, if you put it in context of Paulo Coelho's book, the Manual of the Warrior of Light, one of my favorite books, there's a story in there that specifically talks about, even when you go to war, you have to sharpen your sword. So you will sit there and then you sharpen your sword, and that's when you rest, because even the warrior needs to rest. And then it helps you with perspective, because then you have to understand what are the dynamics of everything, and you always have to put yourself, to me, self-compassion is putting yourself in a position to succeed. So you're not succeeding by taking the selfies, you're not succeeding by doing any of this. Maybe it'll make you feel better, but again, you got to be very, very careful with how you're doing that, because that's connected to the metrics, the vanity metrics, and the external validation. You got to validate your own self. This is, don't worry about everyone else, because when you wait for them, you're just going to get disappointed. So that actually puts you in a worse position, in my experience, and my you invite the wrong energy in when you're doing it for that. For me, the self-compassion is literally, somebody told me the other day, Jess, you're getting a little bit spicy. And I said, all right, fair enough. I step back. I haven't evaluated my surroundings for a couple of weeks. It's time for an audit. And then I audit my surroundings. I'm like, all right, who's taking and who's giving? Simple. Who's taking and who's giving? Takers don't give. They just don't. And takers hate it when you put boundaries up, because it's just like, what businesses I do, what I charge, you have an opportunity to either honor that or you're done, because this is
You see,
a
what
violation.
what I love there is you've applied left brain thinking, which a lot of people are, to actually a right brain thinking issue. Because once you
It's
make
not
that,
personal, it's business. Life is business. This is life or death. Like, this is business.
but
It's not how I feel, it's what I deserve.
but you see that crossover is when actually, and you're right, the secret is in the name self. Okay,
Mhm,
what would, if and this is something you can ask people. You say, well, okay, if you ask somebody what are the 10 things you'd like to do today,
mhm.
there would not be, until you got right down that list, something which was not purely for yourself. And
Absolutely.
that is, like as you say, the audit.
Yeah.
Where am I? What is it? What what are the sources of and it boils down to thing, pain and pleasure. That's always has
Mhm.
been proven that
Yeah.
that's that. Um, People have a far greater motivation to turn away from pain than they are to go to pleasure.
Mhm.
And so don't fight against what actually how you're put together.
Absolutely. You got it.
And
You know, that's why everything I do is about self mastery. There is no set way to do it because people have been giving me a real hard time with, Jess, why are you working so hard? Why don't you just work smart? Go and put, a course online. Do you know how easy it is to put a course online? It's super easy to do that. For me, my integrity is I want it to be impactful. Now I'm changing my mind. It's still impactful, but I didn't realize the social level that we're dealing with right now. There's like some pretty basic things. Just having over a decade in Asia and then coming back to the US, it is a foreign, I mean, we're almost on a different planet in the US. Like it doesn't make any sense to me most of the time. And so for me, these are the stipulations. We're rife with codependency, we're rife with enmeshment. I think that when you're talking about TBI and you're talking about, PTSD and all the other stuff, these are really difficult things to manage when, number one, you're already dealing with your own thing. And if you try to get help from somebody else, if you have to go and make them feel comfortable about it, that's messed up. That's not going to be conducive for your healing or anything. So that, I mean, that's like enmeshment, right? It's a convolution and the cloudy boundaries with emotions, right? And then the codependency with not being able to say, this is what I need, and actually be able to receive that because you're constantly putting somebody else, because now you've adjusted your life to not trigger somebody else, which is just ridiculous and it's exhausting. And so I think, if those two things are like the biggest things that we're dealing with in the US, and then the labels and the sensitivities and all the other stuff. And I don't even like the word fragility because I think that that is a label that people see as empowering. And I don't see it as empowering because you have the stoicism on one side where it's just, like the strong guy that just doesn't express himself, but he gets stuff done. And then on the other side, well, you need to be proud of me for expressing myself. I am proud of you for expressing yourself, but if you're offended because I expressed myself, that's not healthy.
mm, well,
So everything is in context.
I have a 5-year-old, and he, like most, he's the apple of me and my wife's eye, and he does
Mhm.
things and he turns around and say, "Are you proud of me?" And we always say the same: "Are you proud of
Proud of
yourself?"
yourself. Yeah.
Because what we think as in proud or not proud, we're happy. If you say you're proud of yourselves, we're proud of you. You do not need
Absolutely.
our opinion to actually say, "Oh, well, they say I'm proud, I should be proud."
Yeah.
And he, he is in a very early learning stage, and I am hoping by the way which we approach that actually his, I hate the word programming because it sounds like you're a bot, but it's
But it's true, the conditioning.
yeah, but I'm hoping that actually, and it's not a, is it a thought out thing? Yes and no, because actually it's what I believe. It's like,
Mhm.
well, I don't think that actually he should feel good because I feel good.
Yeah.
He should feel good for himself. And he'll start recognizing what's right and wrong. He won't
Yeah.
start, and so I can see that, and it's only because I'm in that situation, and I can
Yeah.
see now how it's phrased from a child who doesn't know, and
Yeah.
it's a purely innocent question, and
Yeah.
so that's quite fascinating.
I think it's powerful because I think a lot of times when we're so conditioned to, look outward and get that external validation and, you know, whatever, we define ourselves based on other people's perceptions of us a majority of the time. By asking your child to say, how do you feel about it, I think is one of the most powerful things that you can ever do, because it's basically breaking down that socialized norm of external, 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 and getting them. I mean, they might have a little difficult time unless everyone in your community is doing the same thing, but in my opinion, it's the right thing to do because they're going to be an overall more resilient little human being when they grow up.
To us, the only normal I've ever found in my life is on a washing machine or a dishwasher. There is no,
I
there
love
is,
that. That's
there
so
is
true.
no normal. And to be honest, I don't want to be.
It's overrated.
Yeah, I mean, to be
It's
honest,
overrated.
what does normal mean? Does that mean I do what people say? I mean, that you see,
Yeah,
again, people's classification of what normal is, and
absolutely.
it's kind of fun being not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I do want to like bring it back just a little bit because I mean I love jamming out with you. It's
Mm,
just it's so much fun. In terms of like some of like the statistics, just to help people kind of understand on how big of a thing all of this is. For TBI, the trauma brain injury, we're looking at roughly 2.5 million cases a year. So on an annual basis, which is actually pretty, pretty high in my opinion. And it's approximately 50,000 deaths per year that's established. Similar, you got PTSD, which usually, where there's one, a lot of, to me, there's a lot of things that kind of come together. So they're not mutually exclusive. If you have TBI, it doesn't mean you're going to get PTSD. If you have
mm.
PTSD, it doesn't mean it's because of TBI. It just means that
You're more
sometimes
susceptible.
it's yeah, like it's common that they happen together, but it's not mutually exclusive. And we're looking at in the US context, it's roughly 7 to 8% of the US population, which is about 8 million cases a year. And actually in Canada, out of all the places, Canada was number one. The Netherlands was number two. I don't remember what number three was. I kind of feel like it was Australia, which would have been really surprising. But you're looking at Canada in terms of percentage, there's 9.2% of the population deals with PTSD. So, and the Canadians are friendly. So it doesn't have to be violence. So PTSD that specifically shows is not because of violence. It's just an overwhelm of a system and not being able to kind of manage it in a way that is healthy for you, whatever that means.
I just to take your point on the TBI PTSD. My wife and I both have severe TBIs. We're in the same accident. I've got PTSD. She hasn't. Same accident, but our trajectories of what TBI and our recovery plans have been completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't. Hey, this is a statistic which I've seen. I can't. It may not be right, but 25% are likely to actually develop PTSD. So if you're predisposed to it, and it's not because of anything particular, it's just how your body is made up,
Mm-hmm.
then that's where it happens. And I personally, I think we've still got a very long way to go
Yeah.
on mental health. COVID, I think, has actually done more for mental health than anything before because it's put it right front and center. Where
Right.
beforehand it was like, oh, it's the poor relative. Now, and especially for businesses, they're like, okay, we
Let's
need
deal
now
with
to
it.
be compassionate. We need to be
Yeah.
compassionate leader with brain and heart. That's not corporate. Corporate is like we're going to crush it, but the
Yeah.
thing is, I think it's done a really, and I think as a whole, going forward, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely. But I do want to ask though, in terms of left brain, right brain, I think you can oversimplify. One is a little bit more analytical, needs to have control and understanding of different things. Like, and then one is a little bit more flowing and accepting. If you oversimplify, I mean, you can frame anything any way you need to. That's how I frame the two different sides of the brain. And it's useful for me to frame it that way. Is there, since the same accident has had a profound different effect on both you and your wife, in terms of personality, are you a little bit more analytical than her, like a little bit more on like the logical side, and she's a little more creative? Because my question is specifically because I want to understand the difference between number one, needing to understand, and then two, the control. Because I personally think when you lean into something and you don't have that perception of what you think it should be, you end up actually being able to go through it a little bit easier, a little bit more gracefully.
my wife has always been creative, but now she is like uber creative. So and that's what she loves doing. She does the editing of my podcast. She comes up with the
Love it.
imagery. So
Mhm.
she's really good. My
So
in
she
a
flowed with it. She was just like, all right, this is what happens. She flowed with it.
and but to be honest, I can't. I've always been creative, but I've found that I'm creative in different ways now.
Mm-hmm.
I never set out to be an author. Never interested me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I now do public speaking. It's not that I didn't do it, but now I've really got into the role,
Yeah.
and it's because I've actually got something I want to talk about. It's not just standing up there and just, flapping my gums, as one of the wrestlers said.
Yeah.
It's not about that. It's actually, I do have something which I'm passionate about, and I
Mm.
have a genuine message for those who want to hear.
Yeah.
And for those who don't, maybe it might help somebody who who wants to
Yeah.
hear. And
Absolutely.
and if that embarrasses makes people, I that's too bad.
Yeah.
I will talk, and so it's very, very difficult, because there's always an inner war of going on,
Yeah.
and I am actually trying to, well, I used to be, because I was a commercial lawyer, I used to be fantastic at handling conflict. Oh my goodness, it was kind of like my thing. Now conflict leaves me in a complete tailspin. I can't deal with it
Wow.
at all. This is this is a little bit off topic, but this is fun.
Yeah.
Um, my wife was
It's
scared of.
relatable. It's relatable though, because when I was in corporate, you could literally lose your job if you didn't hold your tongue.
Yeah,
And so the stakes, it was high stakes. And so you didn't step out of line. Like you didn't. Everything was, is this worth my paycheck? Nope,
yeah,
not worth
yeah.
it. And now it's just like, no.
This is quite a this is quite a fun change which I've noticed, is that my wife, was scared, was never scared of heights. She is
Yeah.
now, and I was scared of heights, but I'm not now. So
The perception, everything, the perception and like the framing in your world, not to make fun because it's not making fun, but it literally gets rattled and it shuffles around a little bit. It's interesting.
when people
Yeah.
say, we'll shake the tree and see what comes out, that, I can tell you,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
effectively what happens.
Yeah. So what type of therapies and different strategies have you used in order to come to terms with it? Because you
Um,
reference going to psychologist or going to therapy and stuff like that, with like talking it out obviously is a very powerful way. What
it,
are some other strategies?
it is, but it again, it it happened. It works for some people, it doesn't for others. So there,
Right.
first of all, and I think also, I think trying to say, "Oh, I'm over trauma," I think that
It's a
is
lifelong
yeah,
journey. It's a
and I think
lifelong
that
journey.
causes stress in yourself, because then people are, "Oh, I
Yeah.
haven't got over that yet." I don't think you ever get over it, and I always think
Mm.
that we are all in some type of recovery, and so that takes a lot of pressure off you straight off the bat. Unfortunately, I'm still knee deep in medical stuff, so
Mhm.
they effectively, I'm there. My psychologist, he's a lovely guy, but with complex PTSD, it's trauma, trauma, trauma. Now, that's very similar for people who have been in abusive relationships, people
Mhm.
who have abuse in the past, where you bring in something which is similar and it triggers back to the time. I
Mhm.
have that type of stuff with my, I don't want to call it an injury, because that's effectively my PTSD injury.
Right.
Um,
To frame it for everybody that's listening, if you oversimplify to people that go to war, if you're in like a single war, that could be considered like PTSD. But then if you break it down into the multiple battles, that would be like CPTSD,
mm,
because that's just like the habitual. It could be similar, but your body hasn't figured out how to handle that overwhelm. And so by continuing to get overwhelmed and overwhelmed and overwhelmed, it creates something a little bit different, which is why they call it complex and complex PTSD. So sorry, just
no, no, no,
clarifying.
and it's a great explanation. I always have the, people are frightened of spiders. What
And
they
I'm not a scientist. That's just based on like having conversations with people, because I've done over like 50 workshops and trying to figure out how to make it easy as possible. So
people are one of the attempts is, which doesn't work, is you're frightened of spiders, and what they do is
yeah.
they do a cognitive exposure, where first of all there's one in the room, and eventually you get to the point where you're right up. That is one way of dealing with it. It doesn't work with me, but it is one way. So the why I say that is because there is a very hard to put something universal. The one thing which I have really used, and it my doctor, the first thing she said to me after I sort of was coherent, she said, well, you're going to have to develop some self-compassion. And I was really disappointed because I was kind of hoping she'd give me some pain meds. And it was really difficult to go down to local pharmacy and say, have you got a couple of bottles of self-compassion, please? So, so, but, you know, I must admit
Absolutely.
that's something you can do now, and that's universal. That's, you
Yeah.
know, all the other bits which come off it, that's your bag. So people
It's
can,
simple, but it's complex. So that's a nuance that people don't always understand. They think it's the same thing, but it's very different. It's very simple, but it's very complex because we've never been taught that.
mm,
So it feels very awkward, and we have a lot of resistance. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but yes,
no, I
I just
mean,
wanted I just wanted to support you because I'm like,
no,
it's
no,
not easy.
no, and I think you're right. I think, and I don't want to jump on the education system, but there's always the but. No, I'm going to
Yeah.
say and, because and's a lot better word. Um, we are taught how to use our five senses. That is effectively what we are taught, you know, touch. What it doesn't deal with is the higher faculties of will, imagination, and all those other parts which are come under resilience. It's kind of like you finish education, they go, okay, through, and that's life. Now that's a big deep
But
pool.
those growing up, those are the alternative schools. They're not the normal schools. Those are the alternative schools because it means that you're not as smart, you're not as capable, you're not as competent. So it's the literally the alternative learning. And it's like, what? I mean, you don't even realize it when you're growing up because that's just, what it is. And then as an adult, you're like, man, that was harsh. That I don't think that's right.
And the problem is, what you know, is that we see adult problems with child eyes because that is the way we have grown up. That's the belief systems we've been handed.
Yeah.
So it's no wonder that we can't deal with these complex adult problems. And it's
Yeah.
not saying anyone's immature, but we just all look at it in through. I mean, for example, would you take relationship advice from a 13-year-old?
No.
But that is the way we look
I
at.
would take I would take curiosity, and I would take purity, and I would take components of relationship with self, but not relationship with others. Because I think at 13, you're still untouched to a certain extent by the harshness of life. And so they could probably remind me of a lot of things, of the joy of catching, you know, lightning bugs in summertime, or, you know,
But you,
watching butterflies and
but you see, you know, and I accept all of that, but trying to turn that to something which is a complex adult thing, that's
oh, absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
and so you know,
I agree with you.
it's and I hear people, oh, I want to get in touch with my inner child again. My inner child at school was looking out the window, daydreaming, and then you say, Rogers, because they never used the first name, Rogers, you come back and on my report card, be good if he concentrates. I could have been dreaming up the next whatever it is, but that was
Yeah.
no, you need to come back and you need to
Yeah.
do this test.
Yeah.
That
You had to play within like the society norms and the society kind of like regulations and stuff like that, which I think is really sad because I feel that a lot of kids um they silence themselves, and it's a learned behavior. So as adults, they're doing that. I mean, as a coach, as a resilience coach, one of my programs, literally the best method, literally the first one is breathe, the second one is evaluate. When you're in that evaluation process, you have to find three perspectives, and the easiest one is to view the situation that you're in from an 8-year-old perspective, your perspective as an adult, and then an 88-year-old's perspective. So many people that can't do that. And so it's like, all right, let's go back to number one and get back to the breath. I'm like, all right, cool, let's view it from your perspective, your parents' perspective, and your child's perspective. And they understand that. But from their own perspective as a child or as like an adult, sometimes it's very complicated for people. And then that's, yeah. I mean, the first two steps, like we spent a lot of time on that. We're just like, all right, go
mm,
back to step one. Let's go back to the breath. Because a lot of times you got to calm down the system, because I think we don't realize on how fast we're operating.
I, I think
We
that's
just everything is super duper quick. I mean, if you ask somebody how many different types of clouds are there outside, like there's just clouds.
Mm.
If you actually stop and you watch, just like 3 layers of clouds, maybe more. And they're like, you're crazy. I'm like, just stand here with me. And it's incredibly difficult to get somebody to be quiet for 1 minute.
Mhm.
It's awkward. Because
But
our pace of life has just been ridiculous.
silence is something which people feel they have to fill.
Yeah.
And you know, if you, and again, that's when I was negotiating, and I was a boy. No, when I was negotiating, silence used to be my biggest weapon, because people, you know, when watching this, they can see I
The
talk a lot.
mind, they're doing somersaults, they're doing the Olympics in their
So
mind. And they're like, what is he gonna
I'd,
say?
I'd say quiet, and they would, a lot of the time, majority of the time, they would fill that silence and they give me everything I wanted before I
Yeah.
even uttered a word. And it it's it's a really weapon, maybe not the right word. It's a very good device that actually. And there's a great clip of somebody asking Keanu Reeves this very long question, and then they give him this question. Then he starts, and it was like, you know, that that's the difference between a reaction and a
Yeah.
response. And you know, according to
Absolutely.
Viktor Frankl,
Yeah.
but
Well, it's the same thing because like so I don't edit my videos. Like I just don't. I think number one, it's not a good use of my time. There's so many more better things to be doing, to be perfectly honest. So maybe I'm lazy. But I think, the reflective pause, the gazing, trying to find the words, I think that's important as part of it. It doesn't have to be like, da, 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 da. And I had a video edited and the videographer was giving me a hard time with, we want to cut this and we want to cut that. And I said, no.
mm,
And they're like, you need to cut it down. I was like, I don't need to do anything other than die and pay my taxes. I want the pauses in. If you don't want to keep the pauses in, I'm gonna find someone else to put the pauses in. This is not negotiable. And, and maybe I'm a
slip that
difficult
one in. That
client,
was
but I
really
know what I
funny.
want and I know what works. and then and then all of a sudden it was just like, and then it was like, no, that actually does, because it changes the flow. And I'm very switched on, high achiever, and very like boom, 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 boom. But when I'm having a coaching moment, I'm not. When I'm having that coaching moment, I hold this space. And so it's different because sometimes when you have those videos, you need to allow that pause. And as a speaker, you know this more than anybody. It's the cadence, it's the swings, it's the eye contact, the intimacy,
Well, you're right,
and
because
building all of that. And people just
5% of what is relevant comes out of your mouth. 95 is not. And there's another, and everyone will know this. People will not remember what you say, but they will remember on how you made them feel.
pretty sure that's a Maya Angelou thing.
Yeah.
Was that
And
Maya? I think it's Maya. They won't remember what you said or what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
well, if you want any sort of, and I use this as well, Mr. Bean.
Yeah.
Mr.
Great
Bean,
character.
but,
Great character.
but he doesn't say very much at all, but you can
Yeah.
see from his mannerisms, and that's what's funny. It's he's got a rubber face, which is really funny anyway, but it's all the mannerisms he says which actually gets the whole story across. And he says,
Yeah.
and that is the important, and I use that to show how important body language is and how
Yeah.
non-verbal communication, how important that is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Especially now that we're in World 2.0, everyone's at home because they're all like hunched over, sitting, at the computer screen, like trying to, figure everything out. It's like, okay, go for a walk. And they're like, why? I'm like, because your core needs it. You need to remember how to stand up. You need to remember how to hold stuff, whether it's a briefcase or backpack. And they're like, I feel goofy. I'm like, well, your body's gonna feel better.
to us,
Yeah.
I think
But
you're
yeah, the
right.
body language is very important.
Yeah, and even on, people say, well, how can you teach body language on Zoom? It's very
You
easy.
can.
It's very easy. Um, it's people are, oh, well, it's only this part. Well, okay, when you talk to people, how many times do you actually look at their shoes and talk to them? You don't. You talk to this part of the body.
You
So,
actually always had to put on pants though.
well,
Because if you put on pants, you actually feel you feel like, I mean, okay, so whatever works for you, right? So maybe a sarong might be a better equipped for you rather than pants or something, right? But
I was just looking.
you have to dress the part that makes
Yeah,
you feel better.
I was just looking down at my no, it's the classic newsreader, because sitting here
Yeah.
in Hawaiian boxer shorts or whatever. But it's you're right. I mean, when I used to wear a suit as a commercial lawyer, that was my armor. I
Yeah.
put that on to go to work. I took it off in the evening, but
Same thing for athletes. That's your uniform. Like that's your armor.
hmm,
You act different. So for me, it's like I have a hat that says spread love, and I'm down to business. Usually when I teach my group fitness, or I have like a headband, and I'm switched on. I'm focused. I don't miss a single beat, literally in the entire class. When I don't, I'm just like, oh, 2 beats off. Sorry. Oh, just JK. We got
but
2 more bonus.
But you see,
it's it's
if you watch any athlete, they always have their routine. They always
yeah.
do the same thing. Like if you watch
Tap into
tennis,
that space.
yeah, you watch Nadal. I mean, he does
Yep.
all the same stuff each time,
Yeah.
and that's because actually he's beyond the physical form. He is actually 100% into what he's going to be doing next.
Yeah.
And there's stuff which he doesn't sort of sit there and go, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do.
You train it because it becomes autopilot. You train yourself to get into that position. You don't just flip a switch. I mean, if you're really good, you can flip a switch, but that process of putting on your armor and then doing your rituals, that's part of how you tap into that space.
Mm. It's even Tony
Yeah.
Robbins. When he comes on stage, if you watched "I'm Not Your Guru,"
Mm.
which was on Netflix, brilliant, and you get to see he does the same thing every time he goes on stage. I'm
Yeah.
not going to spoil it for anyone, but you know, everyone has that
Mhm.
type of routine.
But that's why I also laugh, because when society puts together these like ridiculous lists
Mm.
with what do high achievers do, if you're going to feel really silly doing it, I mean, for me, I do things in fours, right? I don't think I've ever said that out loud in public. So I do things in fours. So if I'm grabbing almonds, it'll be 4, 8, 12, something like this. I don't do it consciously. It's not like I'm sitting there like, oh, let me grab it. It's just, it's gotten to that point where I'm like, again, really? And then I laugh. And I didn't realize that I was even doing it down to, I don't use toilet paper anymore, but even going to the bathroom, and it was like 4 pieces, like 4 little squares of toilet paper. I mean, I use water right now, but it's funny because like all these different things that kind of like, they get ingrained as part of like your warrior journey, or the thing that makes you feel better. And
Mm.
it's worth saying specific to the toilet paper, because I feel like I need to justify this a little bit.
Yeah, I tell
I
you,
know that I don't.
everyone has lent in on that comment. I can tell you now.
I feel like I need to explain that as it comes out. I'm like, why'd you share that? So when we're talking about normalized behaviors and everything, the first thing that happened in the US when the pandemic started, people were starting physical altercations over toilet paper. That was absurd to me, absurd on so many levels. And I get it, but I don't at the same time, because for me, in terms of resilience, it was okay. I've lived in Asia, I've had hoses. Europe has bidets. This is not an abnormal thing. This is an example of the human conditioning in society conditioning. And now we are weaponizing toilet paper and using it as a catalyst to allow our unprocessed emotions and trauma to bubble out and cause physical altercations with other people. And people are like, Joss, that's not how it works. I'm using a cup of water. Here's my solo cup. Don't touch it. and, and then when toilet paper was going up to like $25 a roll, I'm like, and now people are they're arguing, specifically in Chicago, people were hoarding. I'm like, that energy was not worth it to me because I already made a decision. What am I going to do about it? This is my solution. On to the next thing. Didn't even give it a second thought.
The
And yet that was a dialogue for months. I'm like, are you guys gonna get that time back?
yeah.
Why are we still talking about this?
I must admit, and I watched Kevin Hart last night, and it's a recent show, and it's
Mhm.
giving comedians forever now so much material. It's like
It was a shitty situation. Like, I
exactly,
mean, all these different things.
and
Hilarious.
so when you when you look at when I mean, to be honest, look, when the future generations look back at what we did, they're going to be, really? That's what you did? I mean,
I'm already
it
there. I'm
feels,
just like, I
you know,
can't.
so no, it is. It's
But in context of CPTSD, that could very easily, and it's not to diminish it because it's just giving examples, right? So the examples are depending on your attachment, depending on your conditioning, depending on your experience. I'm blessed because I had that experience where using a cup is normal.
mhm.
That's not normal for everyone else. So for me to expect other people to use that would be very judgmental rather than critical thinking, right? And so based on my experience, my hope is that their curiosity would be like, well, she's not even upset about any of this and she's doing that. Let me understand what's happening over here. It's not my job to teach you. If you want to ask questions, I'll explain, but I'm not going to say, why are you doing this instead of this? Not my problem.
I think
And from a PTSD perspective, this is something that could trigger somebody over every time they have to go to the grocery store or every time they have to go and buy toilet paper, because that is a specific like event that we can use as an example of what could be traumatic. For me, it's not traumatic because of my experience and my agility for that. For other people that don't have that same, toilet paper is
hmm,
like a need. And it's not to say that it's wrong, it's just saying that they're doing the best that they can given what they have. And so knowing that this is something that they need and then they can't get it, now they get into a different emotional state or mindset for that. And then it continues to get worse and worse and worse because now toilet paper prices were going up and it just turns into a whole situation. So for me, that could be another example in life on what could be triggering and or considered a form of complex PTSD.
I mean,
I mean, tell
no,
me
no,
if
no,
I'm
no.
kind of on point with that.
I was just about to share. There's a lot of triggers I don't even know are triggers, and unfortunately, you find out as you go along. But I do know that I have triggers of sudden and loud noise or movement and people. Now, I'm very much an extrovert type of person.
Mhm.
I really like the virtual thing because I can control my environment here.
Mhm.
Um, if I had to go and do a real one, I'd do it. But if somebody made it, or dragging chairs is a real bad. If someone had made that noise, I go to pieces. I have no control over that. And
Mhm.
so, because I don't have, so standing in front of 10,000 people wouldn't bat an eyelid. Somebody dropping a pen on the floor, different game altogether. And so
Mhm.
that it's not just what that's the sort of the unevenness of the areas,
Yeah.
and for most people the thought of doing public speaking would terrify them.
It's
For
the number
me,
one, it's the number one fear in the entire world.
for me,
Public speaking is number
i
one.
I love it.
Yeah.
But if somebody said, oh, I'll just pull up a chair, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah.
So it's important to actually, it's not an even process. And one of the final things I'd say is having a sense of humor. You need a sense of humor. And if you can do that and not take yourself too seriously, that is mercury, one of the best pieces of medicine and advice you can give and
Absolutely.
self-medicate with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was reading, I can't exactly remember what the quote is, but when you laugh, that is the soul saying thank you, because that's when you're 100% present. Because and I really I need to look it up to find out who said that, but it's become part of like my everything, because I can laugh by myself. I think I'm hilarious. other people might not see me being funny, but I don't laugh at the expense of other people.
No.
So a lot of times, like when we're talking about the comedians and stuff, a lot of times we poke fun at human interactions and subtleties about that, which maybe there's a time and a place for it. But for me, I laugh at myself like, oh my goodness, Jess, that was, you're in a trauma position right there for a minute. Like, so we're still making these decisions. We're still trying to prove our ego wrong. Like I'll laugh at myself with stuff like that. Like you knew better, but we just had to double check our ego for a minute. Or like
I
with the
think though
plans, I'm
that
like, how you guys doing today? And they'll talk back. And it's like, oh,
I
just
think
stop.
where the comedians really have their bit is their interpretation of something, and that,
Absolutely.
and so somebody may
Their
something say
lens.
some and they see it in a different way, and
Yeah.
that's where, for me, that's where I actually really like that.
Yeah.
And and I I'm into watching Kevin Hart at the moment, and
Yeah.
a lot of what he says is how he reacts to a situation, and it's funny because he says, "Wow, it's completely extreme,"
Yeah.
and I think, again, it's not funny to poke fun at somebody else. It's not
Yeah.
that somebody doesn't
But
have
it's
to
but
be
it's what's been normalized.
what somebody doesn't need to be the butt of the joke,
Right.
but actually you're into. I mean, I tell stories which are about myself, which people will go, "Oh my God, that how can you make a joke of that?" Well, I just do,
Yeah.
and that's how I've got through and survived stuff which is pretty much unsurvivable
Yeah.
because of that. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, if you look at yourself,
100%.
I mean, if you look at
100%.
yourself and if you can laugh, well, you're a long way down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember, I mean, just like kind of reflecting inwards, right? I remember I used to get really upset when people early days in Asia, they would ask if I had daddy issues. And it just became like this big issue for me. Like I would have explosive reactions whenever anybody hinted or breathed that towards me. And then when I came home, I was like, all right, whatever. And it was my father who tried to kill me. So obviously I did have some sort of daddy issues, right? Because he's like the person who's trying to hurt me. And it wasn't until recent, so that would have been 3 years actively into my recovery, right? It's a lifelong thing, so still working through everything. And I had a couple people that were a little bit more mature, a little bit older, and I had to laugh because I didn't even understand the dynamic of what was playing out until a certain point. And it's not even saying it was like romantic, like not like that. It wasn't, what society tries to claim. Not that it would be wrong, not that I need to justify it, but it was just funny because in that moment, I was living out a similar situation of what had been happening maybe 10 years before, and it was explosive. But now I'm in that similar, or was in that similar situation, and I laugh, and it's just like,
Yeah, I mean, humor is a personal thing,
yeah,
and when it comes to mental health, I think
yeah,
it's a valuable tool. I think you can get a very serious message across without devaluing it by and still use humor.
yeah,
And so
absolutely. You
don't
also disarm people that way too, and
yeah,
it makes it easier to talk about otherwise uncomfortable
yeah.
topics.
Yeah, and for example, people say, "Well, how are you feeling?" I say, "I feel like I've been hit by a train." That was my accident. Actually, I was hit
Yeah.
by a train. But the people are like, "Oh my, how can you say that?" I'm like, "It's kind of funny." So, so
Plus, it's true, so I
well,
can.
yeah. So, but that it's a personal thing,
Yeah,
but I really do think that that's a kind of a focus on yourself point right there, because
yeah, absolutely.
you're able to if you're able to actually say, I am compassionate with myself, but I am so confident with that compassion that I am quite
Mm,
happy to use myself as a as a reference for humor. I
yeah,
think I think you've got a complete closed circle there. So I think,
yeah,
for any viewers, for me, that would be a takeaway message.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I definitely appreciate you being able to jam out. And we've referenced so many different things. So, number one, there's 2 different months in a year that specifically focus on TBI. There is a lot of harmony between the athletic community, the survivor community, the warrior community. I mean, it's something that affects a lot of people. And the best thing to do as somebody in the position is to understand that invisible wounds are difficult and you're not alone, and just keep trying to find different tools to create the new normals that you need for you. And then I guess, like, if you're an ally, the support function of allies, right? So for the allies, it would be to just have patience and understanding, because this is a very complex situation that is already frustrating, and it might be a little bit more frustrating when you're trying to explain something that you just don't understand yet. So just to have like as much patience as possible. And to me, it might even sometimes be a little triggering to ask a lot of questions, because you might make people feel a little bit self-conscious about it. I always default on, what do you need in this exact moment and how can I help you? And that seems to be my most compassionate way, because it helps with the codependency, it helps with the enmeshment, it gives somebody else the opportunity to articulate exactly what they need, and then also offer an opportunity where you can help them and they can receive your help in a way that's meaningful to them. So that's worked out really well for me and like my experience. Maybe it could also work out, with all the people within the TBI community and also within the PTSD or even the CPTSD community. And so if people want to get in touch with you and jam out, I will definitely put in all the contact details. So what's the easiest, where is your favorite playground to play and do all of your advocacy work?
My favorite is LinkedIn, and
Yay.
yay.
It is a good playground.
Well, it is a good playground. It's a nice sandbox, and but I go under the title Paul S. Rogers because apparently there's hundreds of Paul Rogers. Who knew? But so you'll find me. It's Paul S. Rogers, and yeah, I'm very happy. Drop me a message or something, and if I can, I will certainly help. So for sure.
Perfect. And people that want to hire you for any of these stages, make sure to put the rubber bottoms on the chairs. That would be ideal.
Yeah, no,
And anything up to like 1 million people, you would definitely be able to serve, because you are such a very articulate, authentic, and driven by experience, which I just think is probably the most powerful, because it's okay to be a public speaker, motivational speaker, but when you come from a place of experience, it's a different ballgame altogether. So I think that people should definitely, get you on their radar for any of like the speaking gigs and stuff. And then the last thing is for the new-ish venture that you have, where you help other people with like their, what do you call it, the find your voice.
Find Your Voice, which is a public speaking program which I have designed. Um, I've had training of how to design your perfect speech, and hey, it's a bit like this, to be honest. It's not that it's unorthodox, but it gets the message across, and it's not just about getting up and talking. It's getting up and actually using your stories, and you are not your story, you are the lessons you learn from the story, and that
Yeah.
is the how. That's what you can give to people, and
Mhm.
that's what I think makes a good personal, a good public speaker.
Absolutely. We all love those storytellers, the ones that, we meet at parties or the odd barbecue and stuff like that. And it's like, man, they live such a fantastic life. And it's just that element of curiosity and magic, because you can make anything, when you frame it. I personally think that the way that you internalize a situation can either facilitate continual growth and expansion and healing, or it can kind of keep you in a place of stuck. And so I think that in itself, even even if people don't want to be a public speaker just based on personal development, I think that they should definitely get in touch with you, because that is a skill that could be used for anything.
Yeah, I mean,
So good for
it's
you. I'm proud
the
of you.
no, thank you. Speaking as a byproduct, it's an important thing, but it's not just one dimension, and
Yeah,
that's why. Hey, and also, if I don't enjoy it, I won't do it, and it's as simple as that. And so I enjoy it, and so I have as much fun as they do. So
absolutely.
perfect.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate it, and happy Mental Health Awareness Month. And thank you so much for joining the extravaganza. Again, we just, I had a lot of energy for whatever reason, and I needed to channel it constructively because that's what I do. And I was like, what can I do? I missed it last year. So I'm like, all right, we're not going to miss it this year. Last year, I just did a lot of workshops. So I'm like, because I was at the start of the pandemic. And so I was really heavy into the domestic violence space. Gosh, I think I had 15 different speaking engagements during the month. And it was hard. One of the groups, it was only about 35 or 50 people had signed up, and it got live streamed to like 39,000. I'm like, what? And so it was, I mean, it was a hot topic, and I don't mean that in a light way because it's domestic violence, right? So it was very sad. But this year I wanted to keep it a little bit more lighthearted and come at it from a bunch of different perspectives. So having people share their own personal anecdotes, raise awareness for whatever cause is in their heart, or just share like some of their services, because I think once you go through some kind of mental health hiccup, you see things a lot different. And I think that in itself is worth shedding light. So I appreciate you being able to share this space and allowing me into the space. So thank you so much.
That's my pleasure. Thank you.
And we'll see you soon.